Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Madison Square Garden. I'll be transparent. I tried to get to this game. Tried to convince the wife, you gotta get to New York during the holiday season. She was like, yeah, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to New York. It's too expensive. But I bring it up because UConn versus Gonzaga, top 25 matchup, Madison Square Garden, 8 p.m. Eastern on Fox. By the way, credit to Fox. They put a lot of these games on in prime time. This is a big one, and I think it's kind of a telling game for both teams coming into this matchup. So let's go ahead and break it down. First of all, it's amazing what a difference 2 weeks can make in the world of not only college basketball, but in the world of takes, okay? Because 2 weeks ago, UConn was dead. I saw people that are paid to cover college basketball saying they're going to the NIT. I said, that's ridiculous. But also, there were the Dan Hurley takes, okay? Oh, Dan Hurley, he's out of control, and he's lost the locker room, and he's done this, and he needs to stop yelling at refs. First of all, you know refs make like $3,000 a game. If you can find me a job that pays $1,500 an hour, I'll let Danielle Hurley scream in my face all darn day, okay? That's one. But two, I think there were coming out of Maui, and this I think was fair. Now, I think going to the NIT was overblown, but I do think that there were bigger issues coming out of that Maui run. Now, listen, we talked about Maui at the time. The Memphis game they could have easily won, maybe should have won, minus that Dan Hurley tech if that tech doesn't happen. The Colorado game, Liam McNeely went out with an injury. Caravan went, I think, 1 for 7 from 3. So, it wasn't good, and there were questions. But what I will also say is this. UConn got back to the mainland. They're 3-0. And their last 2 wins, beat Baylor at home, went to Texas and Austin and beat Texas. And all of a sudden, nobody's talking about the NIT with this team anymore. So UConn comes in on a 3-game winning streak. And what's really been interesting is kind of, again, just the evolution of this team and the evolution throughout the season. And what's interesting about this team is that, listen, last year you had so much coming back, everything fell into place, and there was never really room for interpretation, right? Donovan Clingan was going to be your starting center. Tristan Newton was going to be your starting point guard. It was pretty clear pretty early that your starting 5 was going to be Newton, Cam Spencer, Steph Castle, Caravan, and of course, Donovan Clingan, Samson Johnson off the bench, Hassan Diarra's off the bench, whatever. This year, though, we have to understand, they did lose 4 players to the NBA, and it was going to take time to figure out all these new pieces. You have 4 sophomores that barely played as freshmen. How do they adjust? You have Alex Caravan going from maybe option number 5 in some circumstances to option number 1. Liam McNeely's a McDonald's All-American. How does he fit in? Aiden Mahaney's a transfer. How does he fit in? Samson Johnson goes from the bench to the starting lineup. How does he fit in? So it was going to take time, but I think there was a couple things that have happened over the last couple weeks that are really important. And I also do believe, by the way, that UConn going to Maui and getting a little bit humbled, I think was good for the players. I think it was good for the coaching staff to realize, hey, we don't have all the answers. Just because we had Clingan and Cam Spencer and all these guys last year does not mean that those guys are walking through the door, and we have to make some adjustments. And so what's happened for UConn over the last couple weeks that has led to success? First, most importantly, they're just getting healthy. Alex Caravan obviously dealt with a concussion when towards the end of the Maui trip. Does not play against Baylor. I bring it up because he played against Texas, and he looked like Alex freaking Caravan. Okay, 21 points, 11 boards, 4 assists, 2 blocks, 2 steals, filled up the stat sheet. 3 of 5 from behind the arc. I think that's important. Beyond that, let me say this. Guy that has played really well and I've been really impressed with over the course of the season, Solo Ball, sophomore from Virginia, didn't really play a role last year, but you heard from everybody that went through stores during the fall, this could be a breakout player. I was at practice. He looked awesome when I was there, and so far so good. Averaging 13 points a game. I thought that Texas game was maybe the best game that he has played throughout the season, or maybe, really dating back to last year, the best game that he's played as a Husky. He had 16 points in that game, 4 of 9 shooting from 3 in a true road environment. That's a big deal. And I think he is just giving them that consistent third scoring option that they need behind, of course, Liam McNeely and Alex Caravan. Finally, let me say this. John Rothstein calls Dan Hurley the carpenter. I think we might have to call him the chemist, because he came up with something in the lab that I could not have imagined worked, okay? So we talked about in Maui, what was the problem? It was a lot of things, but one of the problems was their big guys couldn't stay out of foul trouble. Samson Johnson was their starter. Terrace Reed was the backup, and it felt like whoever was in was just committing fouls left and right. And we can debate the refereeing in Maui, whatever. But what was interesting was in the Baylor game, Dan Hurley started to play those two guys together. And it was funny because our Torres on UConn account kind of tweeted out like a gif of like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And then they did it again against Texas. And you start to look at the analytics. The analytics, I'm not a huge like advanced analytics guy, but the analytics, seem to tell you that when those two guys are on the court together, they're better than when they're on the court individually. It doesn't really make sense because they're both 7-footers. Neither of them is a real kind of a super skilled offensive guy. Terrace Reed is obviously more advanced than Samson Johnson, but I just only bring it up because to me, what is interesting about what Dan Hurley has done, those two play together and it's working. Samson Johnson's kind of a 5, but he can defend 3s and 4s. Terrace Reed kind of managing things down low. So they're looking really good. They're obviously facing their biggest test, in my opinion, since they got back from to the mainland, obviously after they beat Baylor at home. And then from there, they took care of Texas. But let me also add this, is that I think this is kind of an interesting game for Gonzaga, okay? And there were a lot of people, myself included. I had Gonzaga in my preseason top 10, okay? But I think when you look at Gonzaga last year, I think there's a little bit of revisionist history on how their season went. It's easy to forget this now, but they lost some bad games in December and January, even in league play. And remember, it wasn't until like mid-February, late February that like it was like we were talking about, is Gonzaga going to make the NCAA tournament? And it wasn't really until they went to Rupp Arena and beat Kentucky when DJ Wagner got hurt that like it was like, oh, yeah, that's the win that they kind of needed. And from there, they kind of rolled. They get to the NCAA tournament. They beat McNeese, which was a bad matchup for them. Then they beat Kansas when Kansas had basically checked out on the season, including Bill Self. He said it in the postgame. They make a Sweet 16, and I think we all just thought, oh, they're great. They're Gonzaga. They're awesome. And I'm just kind of curious because you come into this year, you do beat Baylor to open the season. You destroy Baylor. But it turns out Baylor's maybe not that. Like, I think Baylor's fine, but Baylor lost to UConn. Baylor should have lost to St. John's. Baylor did lose to Tennessee. And I know Baylor's had injuries, VJ Edgecombe, whatever. Like, I'm just not sold that Baylor is this great win. You go to the battle for Atlantis. You beat Davidson. You beat Indiana, but you did lose to West Virginia. You did lose to Kentucky. And so it's like, I don't really know what to make of this team. Couple things that they do very well. Ryan Nembhard might be the best point guard in college basketball. Certainly best guy with the ball in his hands. He's averaging close to 11 assists per game. That's by far the most in college basketball. He's averaging like 2.5 assists more than anybody else in college basketball. And the one thing that Gonzaga does do well, they have a lot of big guys and a lot of size on that roster. Graham Ike, we know he cooked against Kentucky, 28 points, 11 boards in that game. But they also have, Braden Huff, Ben Gregg. They have a lot of size down low. Ben Gregg is another guy. I'm waiting for it to totally click, but 10 points per game, 6 boards per game, really good player. So they have Ryan Nembhard. They have size. But as far as this game's concerned, I'll tell you this. I actually do like UConn to win this game, and we don't have a point spread. We're recording this on Thursday afternoon. But why I like UConn is a few things. One, the home court advantage is going to be real. They call it Store South. Madison Square Garden is UConn territory. Gonzaga, I'm sure during the holidays is going to bring a ton of fans. They have a great fan base. It's no disrespect intended. But it ain't playing in Spokane. It ain't playing in Seattle. UConn's going to have 90% of that building, if not more, and it is going to be loud and obnoxious. I'm a UConn alum. You give UConn fans until 8 p.m. Eastern in New York to kind of let loose. They'll be loose and they will be loud by tip-off. I think those trains are going to start rolling in at 10, 11 a.m., and UConn fans are going to go strong until 6 p.m., 7 p.m. when it's time to head to the arena. 2, I do just like this matchup for UConn because when you go back to when UConn lost, right, what were some of the problems that UConn dealt with? 1, I thought the Memphis game was very eye-opening from the perspective of if you have super athletic guards, you can really put pressure on UConn, and you can really make it tough for them to run offense. UConn's, point guard is probably Hassan Diarra. Aiden Mahaney's probably not that guy, whatever. Um, Gonzaga doesn't have those guys. Like Ryan Nembhard is not a pick you up 94 feet kind of guy. Caleb Battle really isn't either. And I just think that I don't think the way to slow down UConn is how Gonzaga is equipped. And then the other thing I'd say is Gonzaga has that size down low, and I think that's a little bit negated by what UConn has in the two big guys in Samson Johnson and Terrace Reed. So Saturday night, Fox, it's going to be a good one. I'll say UConn wins that one 81-79. Can't fall behind like Kentucky, because the one thing I will say, Kentucky's got dudes that can fill up the basket. UConn, I think it's a little bit more of a challenge to score, and I don't think they're a team that's really built this year, if they do fall down, 12 points at the half, 16 points at the half, to just rally and come back. But I think the matchup and the home court advantage will favor UConn.